It is time for a change, a radical change. Not in the way I look, but much more importantly, it is time for a change in the way I think. In this episode, I share this book with you, which has, in a significant way, influenced my way of thinking about the world, about us humans, about you, and about me. And in some way, I hope that this book will influence the thinking of many more people. Welcome back to Bold Books and Bones. Now, as you know, this channel is all about bold books that reveal something. Many of the books I share with you are ancient or talk about ancient events. And when we read these books, we look back in time. We learn what our human ancestors have done or have not done, and those books reveal how many of their choices have ultimately influenced and created the world you and I live in today. This book, What We Owe the Future, makes us look forward, and it makes us aware that the world's long-run fate depends in an important way on the choices you and I make in our lifetimes. So this is a book that argues that history is not only shaped by queens and presidents, but also, and in a significant way, by people like you and me. It is written by William McCaskill, who is an associate professor in philosophy at the University of Oxford. And he is quite young for having such a title. He was born in 1987 and he already has an impressive career in which he focuses mainly on moral uncertainty, on effective altruism and future generations. Let me show you how this author introduces the whole topic. He starts the book with asking us to join him in a powerful and original thought experiment. And it goes as follows. Imagine living in order of birth through the life of every human being who has ever lived. And then he takes us on this journey. He let us be reborn again and again, and each time he explains what you and I would have experienced. For example, for about 10% of our lives, we would have been a slaveholder. And for about the same length of time, we would have been enslaved, and so on. Now, please keep in mind that this is not a novel or a fictitious story. He shares interesting insights about our human lives to this day on this planet. I found this opening very stimulating, and I became curious about where this author wants to bring us with this particular approach. As of this point, he got me hooked, and I did not stop reading. Now, as mentioned, the book is called What We Owe the Future, and to convince us that we owe the future something, he introduces several ways of reasoning. A first one is that our human species started to exist only about 300,000 years ago. And he makes the point that because of this, we are only at the beginning of our human existence. He argues convincingly that even if humanity lasts only as long as the typical mammalian species, which is apparently about 1 million years before they get extinct, then most of our life would still be ahead of us. So we as a species are only in our teenage years, meaning our human future is still big or could be big. Because, he continues, if you and I knew we were going to live, or better, our human kind would going to live all these future lives that are ahead of us, then what kind of choices would we make? As William McCaskill puts it, how much attention would you want us to give to the impact of today's actions on the long term? I find it, to say the least, amazing how the author is able to introduce these, at least to me, highly thoughtful and original perspectives on us humans in just about 2 pages of his book. And it goes on. Next, the author introduces the concept of Longtermism, which is about taking seriously just how big the future could be and how high the stakes are in shaping it. Next, he argues, we live at the very beginning of history, in the most distant past. What we do now will affect untold numbers of future people, and therefore we need to act wisely. Now, a cynical person could say, why would I care? Because I live here and I live now. Why would I care about the future? Or let alone about future people that I don't even know. But then he does another original thing. He further enhances the concept of long-termism with a moral dimension. He argues that future people count and they will exist, they just don't exist yet. He gives the following reasoning, and I quote, "While hiking, I drop a glass bottle on the trail and it shatters. And suppose that if I don't clean it up, later a child will cut herself badly on the shards. In deciding whether to clean it up, does it matter when the child will cut herself?" So his question is, does it matter if the harm would happen in an hour, a year, or in 100 years? Then his answer to this hypothetical example is no, because harm is harm whenever it occurs. Now, just to make this clear, this is not a kind of book that tries to scare the reader and use poorly founded opinions or only emotional arguments to try and trick us in doing something. Instead, it is a very well-researched book. For its creation, dozens of people have collaborated to share essential knowledge about the impact that you and I can have on future generations and why future generations are important. Now, to be transparent to you, I had to read some of the chapters twice, and I surely will revisit some other parts of the book again, because some of the things he writes are counterintuitive to what I thought I knew, and some ways of thinking are totally new to me. So it takes me some time to work with what he gives us and to digest it all, and I love it when authors can do this. Now, nobody can predict the future. But that does not mean that we cannot carefully investigate and try and assess the long-term value of our actions. For that, the author introduces a framework that has 3 key principles, and I try to explain them in my own words. Of course, you find a much more precise definition in the book. The first principle he introduces is the significance of our decisions or actions. And that is, according to the author, the value that our decisions or actions create over time. The second one is the persistence, meaning how long will the effect last. And the third principle, to assess the long-term impact of our actions, is what he calls the contingency, meaning if we act or not act, would a future state anyway happen? Now, let's get very concrete. To get more familiar with the framework, the author suggests to look back at the decisions we made in our lives and to look at the long-term implications that we brought about through our decisions. So I thought back about which decisions that I made that have, in an important way, shaped my life so far. And I can think of a few actually. I'm sure you will have examples in your own life too. In my life, one of them was the choice to study psychology. Coming from my background at the time, this was not an obvious choice at all. If I look back, I can see now that the effect of my decisions was significant and is persistent. Because decades later, it still has a long-standing value for my life and especially for my professional life. Would I have had the same life without this decision? Well, I'm pretty sure the answer is no. With confidence, I can say that my life would have been very different. It could have been nice and good, or maybe not, I don't know. But my life would have followed a very different track. So this decision in my life also scores high on contingency. I'm sure that you and I also can think about many decisions we made in our lives that did not have much added value or let alone long-term consequences. Of course, we can argue all this is just looking back in time and not looking forward while assessing the effects of our current decisions on the future. But I find it a useful exercise to get familiar with how the concepts of significance, persistence, and contingency work. And now I'm experimenting with using this approach towards the decisions that I make and how they might impact the future while I'm still alive or maybe even beyond. Now, why am I doing this? Why do I spend time on this? Because I like how this author, William MacAskill, illustrates how some important changes came about through people like you and me. And he talks about important events like, for example, the abolishment of slavery and many other examples. But also he looks forward with us on important topics like, for example, the impact of artificial intelligence on us humans. A topic that actually even scares me a bit when I think about the current developments in this field. The book has chapters with names like extinction, collapse, assessing the end of the world, and so on. However, he brings a very positive message to all of us, namely that we can shape the future for the better, while having a good life during our times too. So, if you are looking for making more conscious decisions in your life because you care about the current and future state of our humankind, and you want to better understand how our decisions shape the future, then this book is definitely for you. Now, why does the content of this book resonate so strongly with me? Because for several years now, I disconnected from politics. I also stopped watching the news. And I stay away from the many toxic debates between the so-called right and left. I don't see the point anymore. And I think that this left and right thinking is a concept of the past. It played an important role in the development of our democracies. However, I don't think that this way of thinking will serve us anymore in the long run, especially not when there is a deep division between the so-called left and right. And while it has led to a polarization within many communities and even within countries. Therefore, instead of looking left or right, maybe it's time for us humans to look forward into the future. And to me, and that might be a very personal thing, and I don't expect anyone to follow me in this, but to me, looking forward, and more particularly, how our decisions can influence future generations and our planet in a positive way is a compelling thought that motivates me to act. And that is why I want to promote this book. Hope to see you next time on Bold Books and Bones. Meanwhile, stay curious, stay free, and let's maybe practice in a more conscious way to reflect on the decisions and how they impact your and my future. Bye for now.